Hello and welcome to our large-scale solar and storage toolkit. It's right at 1 o'clock Central, 2 Eastern. We're going to give it just a few minutes. We had quite a few people register for this webinar, so we want to give them just a minute to sign on. So bear with us. Welcome, everyone. As people are filling in, as you could say, into a physical room, welcome to the Large-Scale Solar Plus Storage Toolkit. My name is Brandy O'Quinn. I am a program director at the Interstate Renewable Energy Council. And I want to definitely do a shout out to the Esther A. and Joseph Klingenstein Fund. If it weren't for them, we would not have been able to do this work and develop this toolkit for local governments. Also, if you have not been able to or have not yet downloaded the toolkit, it is on our website, the IREC.org website. It should be right there on the landing page. And there is also a community concerns resource for those of you trying to address possible myths. And I know that Sean is going to be talking about that a little bit later. So Sean Shaw is the CEO and founder of Camelot Energy, and he will be sharing a lot more details from kind of the community and developer perspective. And he and his team at Camelot Energy were instrumental in the development of this actual toolkit. So we could not have done it without their help. And then also we have Ethan Winter, who is the National Smart Solar Director at the American Farmland Trust. We have also integrated many of the resources that American Farmland Trust has provided. And they're a great organization representing farmers and their interest. A little housekeeping. First of all, welcome. Do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, indicate what town or organization you are from. We'd love to see the wide range of geographic representation. We also have closed captioning. It's been enabled for this webinar, so if attendees would like to utilize closed captioning, do select show caption in the user control panel at the bottom of your screen. We will be recording, and we are recording this webinar, and we will send the link out as well as the slides to all of you after the webinar. So I just want to take a quick minute and share with you the Soul Smart Advantage. It is a program that is co-led by IREC and ICMA, the International City County Management Association. Many of you are hearing the headlines, no matter where you get your news, energy demand is growing, whether it's just from the significant number of devices that we have, but also the data centers that are coming online, the AI power, et cetera. And this demand is significant, and no one is going to be, everyone will appear or, sorry, I'm having a moment. everyone will feel the extent in some fashion, in some way. And here is something that shows you the increase in electricity rates by state. And it's the darker the orange, the higher of an increase. So you're going to begin to see families, hardworking families and businesses, where it's causing energy insecurity, some by nearly 30%. So it's not just food and other costs, but also your electricity costs. So SolSmart is a program that's been around for 9 years, funded by the Department of Energy. And we have provided national designation and technical assistance to help local governments, whether they're cities, towns, counties, remove barriers to the permitting and inspection processes to encourage the adoption of solar for their residents and businesses. We have many partners. Many of them are their membership organizations, such as counties, cities, as well as World Resources Institute, Great Plains. And they truly serve as national solar experts. We have these best practices and customized support program guides. We tailor this technical assistance to meet the needs of the community. And we have close to 600 communities that have gone through this process across the nation. We have templates and examples of everything, whether it's a landing page, etc. We provide that to every community and help them tailor it to their needs. Our program guides and technical assistance information has all been reviewed and endorsed by the building code official, industry, trade partners, and others, as you can see here. And now that I've gotten you very excited about the SolSmart program, I want to share with you that it is one of elimination of, as DOE eliminates many of the solar programs, we are hoping and reaching out to all our communities, partners, and anyone else that is interested in making sure that this program continues, that if you know of a foundation or a philanthropy organization that might be interested in this program, please have them reach out to me, because we have over 150 communities in active TA right now. And obviously, local governments see the need and they are stepping up and are very interested in moving forward. So if there is anybody you know of, we can scale this program to a specific state, but we hate to lose 9 years of incredible investment in infrastructure. So with that, you are here to learn more about large-scale solar and storage and our tool. So thank you for giving me the time. And I will pass it on to Sean Shaw with Camelot Energy.
Great, thank you, Brandy. And yeah, I hope everyone will do what they can. The SolSmart program is great, and the IREC team and its partners have done fantastic work on that over the years. So one of the things that I want to talk a little bit about is how to get on the same page. It sounds almost idyllic, this notion of project developers and communities working hand in hand for just the best projects that are win-wins for everybody. It is perhaps more unusual than we would like, but it is not indeed out of reach. And in fact, I'm really pleased because thanks to the help of IREC and the Klingenstein Foundation, this large-scale solar and storage toolkit hopefully progresses us toward that vision. Next slide, if you please. So quick introduction about myself. As Brandy mentioned, I'm the founder and CEO of Camelot Energy Group. We do technical advisory work for asset owners, government agencies, investors, and project developers. So we have, I think, a relatively unique perspective and privilege to work in both the public and private sectors. So we support some great state programs. that are in one way or another funding and incentivizing solar storage and other clean energy technologies. But we also get a chance to really work hand in hand and at a very boots on the ground level with project developers and such. We're currently, for example, commissioning about 1.5 gigawatt hours of battery projects. We're helping to build and manage construction on numerous solar projects. And some of the innovative programs we're working on, besides helping with this toolkit, include things like designing long duration energy storage programs and supporting states in implementing projects for fire safety and code compliance for energy storage systems, so we can all enjoy these systems as safely as possible. As you can see, we provide a fair number of services in this area, and our results, I think, more or less speak for themselves. But we work all across the US, as well as in Canada, Mexico, and the UK. So really excited to bring a little bit of a broad perspective, and I'm an engineer, so maybe a little bit of technical perspective to some of these things, but I promise it won't be, I hope, too boring. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So as you can see, we've got quite a few things to talk about today. I think we might as well get right to it. Slide, please. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is why we need a shared vision. If you're not developing projects or dealing with developers of projects or thinking about clean energy, first of all, I'm amazed you found the webinar. Glad you're here. But otherwise, you probably have at least got some of this on your radar. And what this graph is showing is that there is a growing number of communities who, despite what we would all think of perhaps as the many benefits that a clean energy project can bring to a community, in fact, what we see is that on the ground, many communities and an increasing number of communities are putting the brakes on a little bit. They're saying, not so fast. We aren't sure about solar. We aren't sure about storage. We aren't sure about wind. We're going to put up some kind of restriction or moratorium, perhaps, until we feel more comfortable. There's a lot of reasons why this may be happening, but the important thing is to realize that it is happening. And the antidote for much of this concern is to help communities get comfortable with the benefits and indeed the risks of allowing development in their territory. So a clear-eyed view of these technologies, how they work, what they do and don't do, especially in terms of impacts, risks, and potential revenue streams for the community, is really important, so that these folks, rather than putting up a blanket moratorium out of understandable hesitation, actually, in fact, have the resources and the confidence to guide the development process. Imagine communities, instead of being on the receiving end of development proposals, instead perhaps grabbing the bull by the horns and soliciting developers to build projects in the areas that the community wants them in, with the arrangements that the communities want for themselves. So there's a real opportunity here, and not doing this is what I call a lose-lose proposition, right? The current situation where a developer might come to a community and the community might put a moratorium in place is tough. Developers obviously means there are fewer sites to choose from. Right now, the map is shrinking for project developers, and we work with quite a few of them, and it's a real challenge because if a community doesn't have a bylaw or ordinance supporting these technologies, there's always this question of, if I approach the community with this, will they in fact, put up a moratorium as a result of my project, or will they stick me with some kind of really strange and unexpected requirements? What is going to happen? And every time there's uncertainty in project development, there is risk and there is cost. So fewer sites, the wasted development time and cost, there's nothing more frustrating for developers than getting 6 months into a project and conversing with the local community only to have some vocal opponents in town shut it down. That can be really challenging, and moratoria are spreading. I use the word contagion here rather deliberately. I've seen firsthand towns that will adopt a moratorium simply because they know of another town nearby that did it and think they must be onto something. So maybe we better do it too. So that's really tough. That makes it hard for developers. But communities are losing some benefits here as well. So obviously these projects bring significant tax revenues to their communities. There are also incentives in some areas that are tied to green community designation. So for example, here in Massachusetts, if you restrict solar in your community, you're not eligible to receive green community incentives, which, for example, in my town, we got a grant to fund a number of energy efficiency upgrades that wouldn't have been available to us if we'd been more restrictive in allowing renewables to be developed here. There's a lot of local economy benefits. I'll talk more about community benefits agreements in a few minutes, but I won't say the sky's the limit, but there are a lot of ways that you can extract community value from these projects. And then more broadly, renewables do tend to lower energy costs in the region they're installed, and they tend to improve grid reliability. A lot of folks don't know this, but solar and storage projects pay their own way in terms of utility upgrades. So putting a solar project in a part of your town where folks are on a type of grid that maybe is a little less stable or unreliable can be a great way of getting a project to come in and essentially support the upgrades that you'd otherwise have to wrangle your local utility over. So many benefits here to be had if we're willing to tackle this with an open mind and a spirit of collaboration. Next slide, please. So some of the reasons that communities are giving, and we hear this list and many more in our work regularly, but some of these are understandable concerns, right? There is a lot of hesitation over battery fires. This is something that we at Camelot do quite a bit of work around. So we get it. There are sensational news stories, folks are concerned, and it is understandable that they do so. Especially smaller towns who might have, say, a volunteer fire department or otherwise, not feel totally equipped to deal with lithium-ion battery fires. The video you can find online is pretty scary stuff. So yeah, and part of our work is training firefighters and things like that. So we get where some of that is coming from. There's also concern about property value impacts and things like changing the rural character of the land. So if it's an agricultural or kind of woodsy area where folks like to be outside, they may say, well, hold on a minute, I don't want 30 acres of solar panels near my hiking trail. That'll ruin my enjoyment of it. And then there's concern over things like noise and environmental damage. The important thing here is I see too many developers sort of roll their eyes or say, oh, these guys, they don't know anything. Why do we have to deal with this? I get that, but these communities, their job is to protect their citizens and represent their citizens, not to make life easy for project developers. So we have to bear in mind they're not necessarily, being difficult to development for the sake of it. They have legitimate concerns and need to be treated with some respect and dignity in those discussions. Next slide, please. So development itself is changing. Obviously, the changes in federal policy are driving some of this, but I think most of this slide is still true even before. So we're seeing more energy storage. It's more unusual than not nowadays to see a solar project that doesn't have batteries attached to it. And then we're seeing more standalone storage as well. The interconnection challenges are real. Right now, the average time from entering a project into an interconnection queue to completing that project is at least 5 years on average. So developers may have to put a project in fairly early, and that may affect when they reach out to the community and how those discussions go. Or from the community's perspective, there might be some initial conversations, and then 3 years later, the developer comes back thinking the project is still okay and things have changed at the community level. So keeping that in mind on both sides is important because these timelines are stretching out. The public opposition is now more common and more organized. Social media, there are certain groups online that have resources and such available to arm local communities with opposition. Let's say I'll use the term loosely, opposition facts or opposition information that they can use. So there's definitely more available for folks that have objections than there used to be, just as there's potentially more available for proponents as well. And then a lot of things are coming to be online processes in say permitting, and you can even attend town meetings via Zoom sometimes now, things like that. But the opposition is all local. So when we see developers that are sort of zooming in for the meetings, we know that it's the chats in the hallways and at the local coffee shop where folks are getting together in opposition, and that is a key step that a remote developer might miss. So something to pay attention to. Next slide, please. So, some of the advice we give developers when we work with them is to really try to see the community as a partner, not even necessarily a counterparty or whatever, or a regulatory authority that they have to get through, but in fact, what can we do with the community to make this a great project? The local context is super important. There's nothing worse in a rural community than having a big city project developer roll in and treat them like idiots. That doesn't fly. So really, spending time in the community, whether that's attending community events, show up to the steak roast, show up to the ball game, whatever. And don't sell anything, don't pitch anything, just learn about the community, share information about solar or storage in general, things like that. There's no AI, there's no cloud-based fast track for that kind of trust building. And then focusing on the win-win scenarios and combating misinformation is important, and relying on resources that the community is willing to trust. So that might be a local champion. It might be maybe there's a retired utility executive in town who kind of gets the energy markets and how all that works. Whatever the case may be, look for your resources. Next slide, please. So in terms of developer community relations, that comes down to good origination practices, starting early, especially in light of the interconnection timelines. You don't want to finally get through interconnection only to find out the community is now going to stop you, or vice versa. So and don't just go to the town hall. Like I say, get out to events, be transparent. There's so much information available online right now. I don't say it's impossible to mislead communities about things, but it's harder than ever, I would say, given the breadth of information available. And try to line up the benefits with the local community. I've seen a lot of developers, understandably, come in and say, well, if we put the project here in your town, we'll all have fewer greenhouse gas emissions, energy prices in the state will be lower, you'll be supporting this global green energy stuff. That's all maybe true and important, but when the community weighs these sort of amorphous benefits against, yeah, but I have to look at this thing every day when I drink coffee on my porch now, it's very hard to say, to convince people that they should accept a very local impact in exchange for a very diffuse benefit. And then proactively address your impact. So show folks how you're citing the project to avoid impacts. Give them photo simulations, show them actual projects operating in the field. I've seen a lot of communities for whom, say, a battery project amplifies in their mind into this huge industrial flame spewing monstrosity that of their imagination. And if you actually just take them to one, they say, oh, it's a steel box that makes a little bit of a whirring noise when the air conditioner comes on. Okay, fine. It's in truth, it's less impactful than probably an average house in their neighborhood from that perspective, but it gets inflated into something scary. So do your best to demystify the technology. Next slide, please. So, and the local context is important. So a lot of this, and this is one of the other sort of downfalls of our online data. We have excellent GIS data for many sites on everything from species habitat to historical sites, and that's important. But it's also important to collaborate with, if it's appropriate, tribal representatives, community stakeholders, and local folks who hike in the area, who farm in the area, whatever the case may be, because they often know things that aren't on any GIS map. And the minute you go rolling over a local landmark doesn't happen to be in a database, you're going to run afoul of the community. Next slide, please. So, I want to talk about a few of these myths that we do run across, and I know that Ethan's going to touch on some of the more land use aspects too. So I'll go lightly on those. So the first couple, in terms of replacing productive farmland and disrupting habitats, in terms of the things you could, assuming you're building something, solar is amongst the easier things you can build in terms of impacting land use. So it is entirely possible and done every day to build solar in a way that allows for coexistence with farming and agriculture. That's agrivoltaics, which I'll leave to Ethan. And as far as disrupting habitats, again, there are many ways to manage habitat impacts and allow wildlife to traverse through solar projects safely and all that sort of thing. So very common design practices to do that. The floodplain and drainage impacts are often concerning to folks because they imagine that you're replacing some sort of vegetative land cover with big glass panels that shed water into a river that's going to wipe out something downhill. All projects have to do a thorough stormwater pollution prevention plan and go through an extensive permitting process to ensure this type of thing doesn't happen. But even so, it's important to have good construction practices. When we do construction management, for example, we're always on the lookout for sediment control and actually following the SWPPP and things like that. So that's important. Harming the viewshed and character of the land. True, if you don't like the look of solar and nothing is done to mitigate a view impact, that can be troublesome. But also many projects are required to or choose to do things like plant vegetative screening along the fence line. And because most of the time these solar panels are low to the ground, you can effectively screen a solar site with 10-foot trees along the perimeter, for example. So you can make that part of your local requirement if that's a concern for you, or if you have specific parts of your town that are visual resources of some type. So you can make that a requirement in those zones. I talked about the local benefits. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Unreliable. Solar has an average uptime at the utility scale. Solar has an average uptime of 97.7%. That is as good or better than almost everything else we use in our daily lives. So it's not unreliable. There is a sense that it doesn't generate while the sun is not shining. That's obviously true from a technical standpoint, but we can predict weather patterns ahead very accurately. And when the sun is shining, almost all the time, the solar is producing. So as a technology doing what it's designed to do, it is in fact quite reliable. Next slide, please. Not cost effective. I think that speaks for itself. Nearly 90% of all of the new generation added both in the US and across much of the world in the last couple of years has been solar. So clearly small groups like Wells Fargo and Morgan Stanley and Bank of America think it's cost effective. So who am I to argue? Leaching harmful chemicals. The modules are chemically stable. Yes, they have, they might have certain dopants in them that sound concerning, but that's the same thing as saying that if you throw table salt into water, it'll explode because it has sodium. Chemically speaking, the modules are inert and don't leach harmful chemicals. And as far as we know, they last and continue producing and functioning safely for 25 or 30 years. And most of them have warranties to that effect. The lowering of property values, we hear about that one quite a bit. It is highly subjective, and the data doesn't totally support that. For projects that are for sites, for homes that are very, very close to very, very large projects, there can be some impact, but that is, you're talking about something like a quarter mile or less, and it has to be a very large project. When you actually look at the types of community scale solar we see most often, homes in those areas don't tend to witness an actual detraction or reduction in their home value. Lawrence Berkeley National Labs has published some excellent research on this topic that I recommend folks look at if this is of interest. And then noise and fire safety, definitely there are some outstanding odd cases of equipment malfunction where the noise can be noticeable. But generally, the inverters, by nature of the way the field is laid out, are far from anybody that would be not in the solar array already, and you wouldn't hear them. And then fire safety, more an issue raised for storage projects, but certainly something that we hear about as well. Next slide, please. So all of that is to set the stage for some of the challenges ahead for developers and for the communities they're working with. Brandy alluded nicely to what we're here to talk about. So the toolkit that we've put together is at least a partial solution. You can't solve everything with a toolkit, but I think this brings us a lot of the way there. Next slide, please. So a couple of things from it. One of the things that I thought was really exciting here is community benefit agreements. So, I've been in the room when a developer gets up and someone says, what is it going to do for us? And they say, well, we'll pay our taxes. That went over about as well as you might expect. So community benefits agreements are a way to make the benefits local and tangible and respond to the needs of the community, which makes the community a stakeholder in the project by definition. So for example, you can use a community benefit agreement to divert funds received from the project to education. That could fund things at the local school. You could use it to, say, sponsor a science lab at your high school, or provide continuing education for teachers. And it could be continuing education in solar or in energy topics. There's a lot of things you can do there. You can host job fairs, public safety. So for instance, rather than being a detriment from a safety perspective, I've seen projects where, as part of the agreement, they purchase safety equipment for the fire department that they can use on all of their operations, not just on responding to any particular solar fire. That can also cover training. It can cover salaries for staff positions potentially. Libraries, communities, other types of infrastructure can be partly funded or even fully funded, depending on the size of the project. Likewise, healthcare and food security systems. All of those things are available. And in the toolkit, we discuss more about how community benefits agreements can be negotiated and used. The other one that's useful is what's called payment in lieu of taxes, or pilot. This is essentially the project agreeing to pay a set amount per year to the municipality, and both parties kind of come together and agree on what that ought to be. That makes it less complicated because then you don't have to do repeated project assessments, which can be time consuming and expensive to do. And the community knows, and the developer knows exactly how much money is going to be going in and out every year for the life of the solar lease, for example. And then this is also where you can, with that known amount of money, you can do some of the earmarking and such that I mentioned earlier with respect to the community benefits agreements. Next slide, please. The other aspect that comes along with the toolkit is the importance of getting technical assistance. So sometimes, for whatever reason, the community might not sort of take the developer's word for it, might be looking for kind of an independent third party, and the community may not have enough money to get their own experts in. In some places, the AHJs are allowed to hire experts and pass the bill on to the developers, but that's not universal by any means. And some states offer assistance programs where communities can request help from, say, their state Department of Energy, and they'll be referred to technical resources and specialists. So folks that can help communities will be able to look at project designs, help with, answering questions, providing technical background education, without necessarily having a stake in the project itself, just background. So for example, I've gone to communities and contemplating a battery project and not necessarily focused on that project. We'll talk about fire safety risks, how the technology works, all these kinds of things come into play. And so it's a good way to kind of step back from any confrontation between the town and the developer and get sort of unbiased factual information. So the toolkit talks a little bit about how that works, but this can also function kind of hand in glove with the toolkit. Next slide, please. I didn't have time to cover everything in the toolkit today, but there are quite a few other things. Brandy mentioned the community concerns document. That is, I guess I would classify that as a longer and more thoughtful version of the sort of myths I ran through earlier. And we prepared that to help communities both answer their own questions and also give developers some resources that they can refer communities to that are a little bit removed or independent from their specific project. We put in a development checklist. So if you're developing a project and you want a quick reminder on the steps to take to help build that trust and proceed in an equitable manner, that's in there. We talk about how communities can plan ahead. How do you identify in your town zones that might be attractive to developers? So as I said before, as a community, you can take control of your own energy destiny, and maybe you're the one going out and telling developers where you want them to develop and making them compete for your business. Very, very interesting to see that shoe on the other foot. We talk quite a bit more about best risks and benefits. I could talk a lot more about that, but we don't have that kind of time. And we also provide model ordinances. And one of the things that I was really excited to add into a document like this is I love putting in lots of photos about real world projects since we get to work on so many. You'll see plenty of examples in there that might be something similar to what you're contemplating in your community. So once again, here's the download link. I'm sure it'll go out with all of the other materials. But last slide, please. That is all I wanted to cover. So I'm glad to turn it back over to you, Brandy.
Thank you, Sean. That was extremely informative. And I just want to say also thank you to you and your team. We could not have developed this toolkit without you. There's so many resources out there, and it's difficult for local governments to really navigate and filter through them. And so we're really hoping this toolkit is kind of bringing all of those resources together and to serve as a resource for you. So thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
So our next speaker, Ethan Winter with the American Farmland Trust. A lot of pushback in large-scale solar in rural areas is primarily because community members are concerned about the loss of farmland and in their own way of protecting farmers. But American Farmland Trust has a whole area where they are focused on the agrivoltaics, the co-location. So we're thrilled to have integrated a lot of their resources and thoughts and expertise into this toolkit. So I will turn this over to Ethan. Welcome.
Brandy, we'll get our slides up here in a minute. I just wanted to thank you and the IREC team for reaching out to American Farmland Trust as you were developing the large-scale solar and storage toolkit. It was a great opportunity for us to share some resources and find the right places in your resource to elevate some of the things that we're hearing from the agricultural community and to highlight some strategies for moving forward in a constructive way. In the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to share a little bit about American Farmland Trust and how we got into this work on smart solar. I am going to define agrivoltaics as a farm organization is defining it and share some examples of how this is playing out in different parts of the country. And I'm hopeful that local communities represented on today's call will take this back and think about how you can integrate solar in a way that supports farming, supports farmers, and ultimately uses solar as a way to prevent more permanent forms of conversion of our most important agricultural land. So again, this is really relevant because so much of our energy load is going to be dependent on our agricultural spaces. And some of what Sean talked about and set up so well is coming right out of these tensions. So American Farmland Trust is working on this directly. My background, by the way, is in solar development and in farmland protection. So I've worked kind of on both ends of this. And to AFT's credit, we really do see opportunities for synergy. It's not necessarily a giant easy button, but it's something that we can do, and local governments have a critical role to play along with their state agencies and the private sector. So let's go ahead and dive right in, Brandy. American Farmland Trust. Some of you may know us quite well. We're the No Farms, No Food organization. There's probably a pickup truck with a bumper sticker like this somewhere in your county right now. We were a pioneer in developing state farmland protection programs and legal tools for protecting farmland. And we have a mission of saving the land that sustains us through protecting America's best farms and ranches, keeping farmers on the land, and promoting sound farming practices and elevating regenerative agriculture. We have a number of different themes in this work in terms of supporting rural prosperity, healthy and equitable food systems, climate resilience, healthy soils, food security, and wildlife habitat and working landscapes. You can see how these themes and these core mission areas intersect directly with the emergence of solar. Next slide. How are we structured? We have both national and regional programs. We have 8 regional programs across the country serving a number of states, and we're active in 25 states. We have national initiatives, including the Smart Solar Program, but I also just wanted to highlight for those of you who are interested in the other tools that AFT advances, we have something known as the Farmland Information Center, which is a clearinghouse of all sorts of information on farmland protection, soil health best practices, farmer land succession strategies, and other program areas. So I wanted to highlight that. The Smart Solar Program is working with and across these other program areas and with our regional programs, because we know that the emergence of solar is not contained in any one part of the country, and we're really looking for strategies that work in different parts of the country that reflect the agricultural realities there. I'll just briefly mention, I think this was already covered, but the emergence of solar has been really significant in recent years. And last year, 2/3 of the new energy capacity that came onto our grid was solar. As you'll see in the next slide, despite the federal policy headwinds, we're likely to see this trend continue for several years to come. Next slide, please. In terms of land, all of this solar has to go somewhere. The Department of Energy several years ago came out with a report called the Solar Future Study, which modeled how much land the country would need if we were to decarbonize our grid. And the short answer is it's a fraction of the total land base. American Farmland Trust did a deeper dive, and what we found was that over 80% of the ground-mounted large-scale solar would likely be on agricultural lands. And over half of that would be our best land, our nationally significant agricultural land. So that got our attention. It highlighted that solar represented a major new land use for agricultural communities, and it could cut in a couple of different ways. It could accelerate farmland conversion, which we've been seeing for decades now, or maybe it could be a different kind of land use that is not a permanent form of conversion, and a technology that actually supports farm viability. And we really dove into that analysis in our Farms Under Threat 2040 report. And we looked at a number of different states and how their energy build out was likely to play. States like Florida, Texas, California would expect to see well over 500,000 acres of agricultural land needed for solar. And a number of other states would see hundreds of thousands of acres needed as well. So this is very much part of what Sean was talking about in terms of how communities are responding to solar. And AFT developed a Smart Solar Program to really be a constructive voice in this space. Next slide. For AFT, our Smart Solar Program it has three overarching goals. Again, we're a farm organization. We're not a solar developer, but we do work very much with the solar sector to improve its practices and approaches. So our first goal is to strengthen farm viability. Those of you who are working in rural communities know that farming is very difficult, and it's getting even more challenging with energy costs and other input costs only going up, commodity prices going down, and more challenges every day on the margins. So we want solar to support farm viability and not be a further disruptor for agriculture. Our second goal is to safeguard soils and land well suited for farming. What this means is protecting the land base if you're utilizing it for energy development so that we are not compromising our future land for food. And that informs how we originate projects, how we develop, and even how we decommission. Our third goal is to accelerate the clean energy transition, and solar in particular, in a way that advances goals 1 and 2. And that really is our tight focus here. As part of our work, we developed a set of smart solar principles. We went through a lot of effort reaching out to farm partners and organizations to develop these principles, which are our North Stars. Our first principle is to prioritize solar siting on buildings and land not well suited for farming unless it's agrivoltaics. And I'm going to spend some time defining agrivoltaics in a minute. So this is about not adding pressure and conversion threats to our most important farmland. Secondly is to safeguard soils and the ability for land to be used for agriculture. This goes back to my point about really understanding land and soils as an asset to be cared for. And a big part of the opposition in rural communities has to do with how solar development has impacted soils and stripping topsoils that are often a multi-generational legacy for a farm community. Our goal is to keep that soil intact and to take steps to enhance it over time. Our third principle is to grow agrivoltaics for agricultural production and solar energy. I'm going to define that a bit more in the next few slides. It's a fancy word, perhaps. You might think of it as agricultural dual use or agri-solar. But the point here is that it is equal parts agriculture and solar. And there's a lot of different ways that we can tackle that. Finally, promoting equity and farm viability. This is the mantle for everything that we're doing to ensure that this energy transition really benefits equally community members of all stripes. Next slide. Earlier this year, AFT released a definition of agrivoltaics for policymakers. And I do want to spend a couple of minutes on this for those who are working with local and state governments who are on today's call. Again, we're a farm organization, so we very much look at this through a farmer-first lens. For us, agrivoltaics involves an intentionally planned project that has an agricultural producer or farm experts involved from the beginning. So this is not a bolt-on when things are getting hot in your planning meetings and you're needing to win folks over. This is about designing from the beginning for agricultural use. Secondly, it's about having an integrated and simultaneous production of energy in a marketable or market product. This is really important. So think of this as making sure that we're not farm washing or agro-washing this concept, but there's real agricultural production and revenue coming from the land as part of this concept. Agricultural products and activities can include crop production. I'm going to show some pictures of all the diverse applications we're seeing in crops, grazing. Right now, we're seeing a lot of sheep grazing, but cattle are also likely to be a big part of this going forward. And we're also seeing interesting applications with pasture pigs, poultry, and other applications. So again, farmers are pretty ingenious when they have the right space in which to operate. And that's what this is all about, is creating the space, protecting the soils, and giving farmers the freedom to be innovative in and around the solar panels. I wanted to highlight that for AFT, agrivoltaics doesn't include pollinator habitat as the sole use. This may be controversial to some, but we don't see pollinator habitat in and of itself as an agricultural product or as farming. It can be very important to the long-term production of a farm because pollinators are very important. But we didn't want to confuse agrivoltaics with other ecosystem services or ecovoltaics, which you may be hearing about. We also want to make sure that if apiaries are employed, that there's also the ability to change that project use case for other agricultural use in the future. So we'll go ahead to the next slide. Some different applications here, both using traditional or conventional utility scale configurations as well as alternative configurations. The upper diagram here shows projects on fixed tilt or trackers where you're essentially using that space for agriculture, but not changing the arrays very much. A more alternative configuration would be designing for agriculture and having elevated arrays or more spread out arrays so that you're optimizing for the agricultural outcome. Those alternative configurations can often cost more because you've got more steel, you have more height, more spacing, and this is where state incentive programs are really important. If you're wanting to encourage something that's more bespoke and oriented towards agriculture. In Europe, this is actually quite a thing. France, Italy, Germany, Spain now and France all have programs dedicated to agrivoltaics. If you meet a high standard, those projects are receiving a premium in terms of their energy pricing. And that's so that they can save their working landscapes that provide food while generating energy to meet European energy goals. So we're definitely learning from other parts of the country here. There are ways to do this at a lower cost, which primarily involves increasing your row space so that equipment and farmers can work between the rows. I want to highlight too, for those of you who have already seen it, the Appendix B on agrivoltaics, which we'll talk a little bit about. That's really the source information here that I want to refer to. So why agrivoltaics? For one thing, farmers are really benefiting from the lease income from projects. They also want to stay, by and large, in farming. And we've done a number of surveys across the country from Texas to Virginia to Colorado and New York. Farm families are very proud. They want to continue the legacy of agriculture where they can. And they see solar as a way to do that and not to displace their agricultural heritage. They certainly benefit from the lease income from these projects as well. So farm viability is key. There's also an entire ecosystem around farms that solar developers are often not that aware of. The veterinarians, the seed providers, the tenant farmers who are renting that land, often with a handshake agreement. Those relationships and sort of economic ecosystem elements can really be disrupted when a lot of solar comes into an area and pushes agriculture out. So the idea for agrivoltaics is to include agriculture within the project and therefore sustain the agricultural communities around these projects and build more public support. What's really interesting about these configurations is that there are microclimates that can provide shelter to animals, protection from heat, hail, and other extreme weather events. And the very act of utilizing this land for agriculture and thinking regeneratively about how you take care of soils is a benefit. By keeping the land in agriculture, you're less likely to grade the soils and disrupt the soil horizons, and ultimately you're saving the soils that are well suited for farming. This is even enhanced if you've got rotational grazing practices that are building the soil over the life of the project. So this is, for a lot of folks, a real advantage over mechanical mowing and turf grass if you're in an agricultural area. I talked about the microclimates. Studies are showing that there's decreased evapotranspiration. and increased soil moisture underneath the arrays. This can benefit forage. It provides, again, shelter to livestock. And in certain parts of the country where water scarcity is a very serious factor affecting agriculture, these projects can allow you to continue production with less water. And that's going to be a really important advantage for the future. It's college football season, so I thought I would just put a shout out to some of the agrivoltaics universities out there that are leading the way in the research. For those of you who are on the call who are interested in learning about how your state universities are working in this space, I could highlight Rutgers University on this slide, Cornell, Iowa State, Ohio State, University of California, Davis, and many others are getting into this cross-sector research, looking at how agriculture and solar energy development can work side by side. And this is a great opportunity for developers to partner as well, if they have projects where they can be collecting data and sharing that with diverse university teams. AFT has been partnering with the Rutgers University Agrivoltaics Program, which has 3 different trial sites happening right now in 3 different parts of the state on their agricultural campuses. And it makes sense for the Garden State to be leading on this. Agriculture is increasingly challenged by warehouses and other commercial development. And in order for the state to meet its energy goals, it's going to need a lot more solar. So Rutgers has been developing some research here to understand hay, specialty crops, and grazing on these different sites. And again, universities and colleges across the country are getting into this and seeing some really interesting applications and potential. Next slide. At the state policy level, there are some interesting developments here. I just wanted to quickly highlight some of the states that are developing either a actual financial incentive or adder for the energy if it meets agrivoltaics criteria, or they're providing current use or property tax benefits, or they have a dedicated fund for research and demonstration projects. All of this is coming, and Massachusetts was the first state to develop an incentive program. New Jersey has unveiled a 200 megawatt pilot program. A number of other states are coming on strong. And there are other states that are exploring this as well, including California, Oklahoma, Illinois, Virginia, Connecticut. All have explored bid preferences and R&D programs and other ways to support farmer first solar. So what we're seeing, despite the federal headwinds here, a lot of innovation at the state level where energy policy and farmland policy are often really forged. And this really requires state agencies working together on shared goals, and for local governments to be aware of those efforts and to encourage them wherever they can. Local governments have a really important voice in encouraging states to pass funding for this kind of work. Next slide. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of eye candy just to put these words into something that feels a little bit more real. I'm going to start with sheep. Sheep grazing is now a pillar of O&M practices in large-scale solar across the country. There's a great organization called the American Solar Grazing Association, which is setting standards for grazers so that they have qualifications to be working on and around these sites. And this is an opportunity to reestablish our domestic lamb industry, as these sheep are also providing a critical vegetation management service for which the grazers are getting paid. So this has been kind of the first big door to open for agrivoltaics in the US. It's really important to highlight too that this doesn't happen by accident. You want to make sure that you have water, appropriate fencing, appropriate forage, and trained professionals who are working with these animals for the health of the livestock. So again, take a look at the American Solar Grazing Association as an example of a group that's really helping developers and landowners do this in the right way. We know that Cattle and beef, much bigger part of our agricultural economy than sheep and lamb. There's a lot of interest in seeing cattle compatible solar. This upper picture is from the University of Minnesota's dairy research site. They're seeing significant benefits to dairy cows that benefit from the shade during hot days. They need a lot less water, there's much less heat stress, and these canopies are generating power all day long. We're also seeing vertical bifacial panels with the Rutgers crop trials and more commercial projects using trackers. This is a project in Massachusetts in the lower left. This project meets the state's agrivoltaics criteria, so it receives a premium, an adder for the energy generated, and it's able to be grazed as those arrays are tilting during the day. So no change in the agricultural output or in the energy output with this particular approach. Another winner is around hay production and high quality forage. You've got to get the vegetation managed anyways. And another way of monetizing that is to start with high quality forage and have enough row space so that you can bale the hay and provide that critical input to other farms in the area. A recent community in the Hudson Valley of New York, in the town of Montgomery, passed a new solar law that restricted solar on agricultural land unless it was agrivoltaics. And the project there is hay compatible. So it met the standard that the town set for itself. And the farm that was producing hay is continuing to produce 150 tons of hay a year on that site, providing critical sustenance to the local horse farms and dairies that are just an hour outside of New York City. That's an example of the win-win-win that we're talking about in terms of agricultural use and solar working together. Another area that AFT is really interested in, and we hope to see more of as folks are looking at the toolkit and thinking about applications, is around specialty crops. These are projects that are happening right now. The broccoli project on the left is in Western Massachusetts. Again, another project that qualifies for the state incentive. We're seeing vertical bifacial arrays using with grapes. And the upper picture is Iowa State's crop trials with winter squash. So again, this can work in a number of different ways. By and large, more shade tolerant, high value specialty crops are going to be the best use case for specialty crops. We're also seeing some interesting examples around row crops. In the Rutgers example, they grew soybeans last year, the hottest, driest summer that they had recorded in southern New Jersey. And the soybeans under and around the arrays outperformed the control by a significant margin. So thinking about how you modify equipment to work between the rows, but the soybeans grow just fine. The lower right picture here is a project in Massachusetts that grew sweet corn this year. These are smaller or shorter statured corn that did not interfere with elevated panels and a high value summer crop there. So again, what I'm highlighting here is where there's a will, there's a way, and farmers are really ingenious in terms of thinking about how they can utilize this space to grow their crops. AFT is really interested in the opportunities that all of this can create for next generation farmers. We know that a significant percentage of our agricultural land is likely to change hands in coming years. Our farmers are getting older, farming is getting hard, and a lot of kids are thinking, I don't know if I want to farm. It doesn't look like something I necessarily want to do. We are hearing agrivoltaics as an opportunity for that next generation. They're interested in the income opportunities, which are quite different than conventional farming. So we're focusing on technical assistance, and I would again encourage folks on this call to plug into their local university cooperative extension programs and other resources to hear about what kind of agrivoltaics trainings might be happening there. I'm just going to close here highlighting that this is really popping up all over the country. There's a great deal of interest This is, again, not easy. It does require standards. It requires applied research. It requires carefully calibrated local solar laws so that you're getting what you're looking for with these configurations. You don't want to over-engineer your solar code, but you also don't want to create a big loophole. AFT is available to help communities develop their standards, and I know that the folks at IREC would be happy to help as well. But this is just an example of the headlines that have popped up just over the summer with some of the projects that we've been involved in. And you're going to be hearing more about this as farmers are trying to get creative with income opportunities utilizing solar energy. Lastly, I just want to highlight a few areas where agrivoltaics interfaces with the toolkit. This is, again, not something that you want to be doing as an afterthought. Ideally, you're thinking about agrivoltaics the very beginning when you're doing your comprehensive planning, when you're thinking about meeting with developers and they're asking where are the right places for me to be developing a project. Really thinking about soils and land use and the agricultural ecosystem around these projects so that these projects are responding to the agricultural realities where you have. You want to have zoning and permitting processes that support this. We're seeing a lot of different examples where a town may pass a solar ordinance that's encouraging of agrivoltaics, or a state siting process that's encouraging of that as well. And then you want to make sure that the agricultural use planning aspect of this is informed by farmers. And ideally, you've got the ability to enforce. If there's a financial incentive, you have the ability to enforce that agricultural plan over time so that agricultural production is continuing as intended if there's a significant financial benefit. One thing I want to highlight too is that localities and states benefit from best practices that are clearly articulated for developers and especially for the EPCs. This is where sometimes things get lost in translation, where there's good intention to have a project that minimizes impact to agricultural land, but then on the EPC side, significant grading happens and it can really impact the long-term productivity of those soils. So highlighting that if you're going to be intentionally supporting agriculture, you want to make sure that the permitting bodies understand the importance of keeping that soil intact as much as possible. Finally, I just want to highlight the Appendix B, which has a number of links and resources that will be useful for those of you who want to dig in further. Welcome you all to reach out to AFT. I saw some links here from the IREC team as we've been going. Please be in touch and happy to answer some questions. I know we've got some time here for Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ethan. That was very informative as well, and such a great compliment to Sean's presentation. So do put questions if you have any to either one of our speakers in the Q&A. So we do have one question, Ethan. Is the University of Connecticut Ag School involved? And if so, who?
Great question. We did a survey in Connecticut 3 years ago, surveying farmers about their interest in solar and agrivoltaics. We partnered with the University of Connecticut on that survey. I don't believe there's an agrivoltaics program there yet, but they've got good neighbors in New Jersey, New York, and Massachusetts who are actively working in that space, and would be happy to follow up with you to talk to the right folks about setting something up.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, and we have another question. Are agrivoltaic projects likely to experience significant effects from recent changes in federal policy? Mm-hmm. Specifically, are the project economics typically strong enough to support development in the face of waning incentives?
Yeah, that is a great question. We could answer that in a couple of different ways. The change in tax credits will affect all projects, right? It also means that projects that pencil now are going to be even more important for your business. So if you've got projects in agricultural areas you can't afford to lose momentum in your permitting, right? And you can't afford to have opposition stalling those projects, as Sean was explaining. So we hear from a lot of developers saying, we have got to get a more focus on the agrivoltaic side of this, because this is how we're preserving our pipeline. It's also true that there's a need to do these projects in a way that doesn't add a lot of capital expenditure to your projects. And that's why I was highlighting different states are approaching this in different ways. If there's an incentive or an adder, that covers some incremental additional cost. A lower cost way of doing this is to be very selective with your racking technology, working with your landowner to have more row space so that you're actually not increasing the cost of the project. You're being more creative with the space that you have. And you're making sure that your counterparties understand that instead of mowing it, you're going to have sheep. Or instead of mowing it and leaving the grass behind, you're going to have a baler, right? And making sure that the producers have insurance and some protection there. There are ways to do this that don't add a lot of extra cost. And we're confident that it can actually help preserve project pipelines if you're responsive.
I like that. And I can add a little bit there too, if you like.
Right.
I think what I would say is firstly, let's be clear, right? The change in federal policy that has taken the ITC largely off the table for solar, is raising the cost of all energy for everyone everywhere in the US. There is no other technology or alternative that's going to come online in a reasonable time frame to meet our rising energy demand. So we can meet it with solar and storage, or we can meet it not at all. So this is a tax on everyone's energy costs. And from an agrivoltaics economy perspective, a couple things I would add. Let's not forget that the costs of complying with the requirements of the ITC and particularly with obtaining tax equity finance have never been a trivial matter. So you might say, well, we're losing a 30% incentive. That may be true. However, at least 4 or 5% of your project cost probably was going to go into ITC compliance and financing fees. That no longer is on the table. Likewise, if you're not complying with the ITC, you have different options with respect to equipment selection. For example, for an entity, if you're using energy storage on your projects, first of all, that can still get the ITC as before. So storage was largely spared the chopping that the solar sector got. And even there, if you choose to forego the ITC, we are seeing and participating in some serious analyses that show that the cost differential between a FEOC compliant battery and one that is not is about $90 a kilowatt hour. And for those following on at home, that is well more than the value of the incentive you would typically receive. So there are scenarios wherein you are paying enough of a cost premium for compliant equipment that it may dwarf or outstrip the ITC benefit you'd get. So adding storage to agrivoltaics projects can be a great way to improve their economics too. Still claim some of the tax credit. You do have to, solar and storage are separate for tax credit calculating purposes, so you can't share infrastructure too much, but there's a little bit of cost shifting that can be done. So yeah, I mean, losing the ITC, I'm not going to stand here and say that is a good thing for the industry, but I think Ethan raises great points about the resilience of our industry. And I think, we are seeing folks retrading power purchase agreements and things like that. So the revenue side may come up from non-federal sources, plus the declining costs to narrow that gap to something the industry can come to grips with.
Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, well said.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ethan.
Just well said, Sean. Thank you.
Yes, perfect. So there is a question specifically for Sean. Could you share any insights into whether battery energy storage facilities should be located in certain areas? For example, avoiding residential areas, buffers, and setbacks, and how public education about changing technologies with respect to safety and noise aesthetic impacts might help balance renewable energy goals and other trade-offs.
Yeah, no, happy to chat about that one. It's kind of a broad question, so I hope in the meander you're about to experience, I find the answer. So a lot of folks will think about where to site battery projects, and we see them frequently cited in either, wide open areas away from other things. This is common, for example, in Texas. We see a variety of projects there that are sited, relatively far from other things. In more built-up areas, you do have a little bit more to consider with respect to setbacks and fire safety. The short answer is, let me put it this way. The batteries, nothing is perfect. Based on our analysis of historical fire event data, modern battery systems catch fire at the same rate as residential households, which is to say about 0.4% per year. So while no one is going to not take battery fires seriously, it's also important to put that in context. And the testing that has to be done in order for them to be listed, which is required by code, has to demonstrate that even if you initiate on purpose thermal runaway inside the battery, that heat flux, flaming, and explosion are not experienced outside of the battery container. I'm grossly simplifying, but that's the gist. So setbacks, some folks will say 100 feet, some folks will say 50 feet. The answer is probably more particular to your comfort level and the emergency response plan for the project than a hard and fast rule. But that being said, where the batteries are going to be sited is typically going to be near distribution or transmission lines where they can access the grid, because they're usually working in the wholesale market, like any bit of utility generating infrastructure. So if you were looking at a town, for example, and you wanted to earmark areas where you say had relatively low population density, or it was already an industrial area, had access to high voltage power lines, and earmark that for your storage development area, that wouldn't be unreasonable. Those types of areas tend to be lighter on fire risk, visual impacts, noise, because there's a bit of a buffer, that sort of thing. Bear in mind, a 40-foot battery container has what amounts to a residential air conditioning unit on the side of it, assuming it's air cooled. So if you think about, standing outside your house with a central air conditioner unit running, that's about what you're talking about. And even with a whole field of them, sound isn't additive, it's logarithmic. So it's quite easy to carry on a conversation in a battery field while the BESS HVAC units are all operating. So noise is not necessarily a huge concern, and it can be modeled, and you want to check it at the property boundaries and such. So like I said, it was a broad question. I hope somewhere in there I answered. If not, feel free to ask another one and I'll take another go at it.
Thank you, Sean. I don't see any comments, so I think you may have answered the question. Excellent work. Thank you. Are there any other questions for our speakers? And I want to make, just to give a minute, make the comment that even in all the turmoil and elimination of incentives for solar programs, we really have seen, as Ethan has stated, local government stepping up and understanding that they're going to have to play a bigger role in the electric market, because it's no longer where we have taken advantage of the fact that we just flip a switch, that now it's really affecting our residents and our businesses with all the increase of the demand. And so we all have to educate ourselves better on solar, other energy sources, and more will come online. But as Sean said, solar is the quickest and the cheapest to bring online versus all the others that will come on the market. So, any other comments from our panelists? Things you
Randy,
wish?
I want to just build on that point in terms of localities leading. If you are interested in working with a landowner, or if your community has a project that's looking for technical assistance on agrivoltaics, AFT has a really neat new collaboration with the National Renewable Energy Lab. It's called AgriTech, and I believe there's a link in the chat on that. That's a no cost technical assistance for community organizations, farmers, tribes, and others who are looking to create a demonstration project. So just wanted to highlight that opportunity is there. And again, please be in touch if you're interested in what your land-grant university might be doing on this front as well. But if you're interested in a demonstration project, we'd be happy to take a look at it through our AgriTech program.
Great, thank you. Sean, any other departing comments?
Only to say that I greatly appreciate you and Ethan helping with this webinar, the IREC team who put it together, all very much appreciated for including me in this effort, and very much thank you to all of the folks who have joined us here for the last hour and a bit to learn more about this topic. It's super important. Solar and storage aren't going anywhere. They're going to be needed, and we're working hard to make sure they come out to the fore. So thanks to everybody, and certainly reach out if you have questions or if folks think there's anything I can answer for you. Camelot's also available to answer questions or provide support to folks.
Great, thank you, Sean. So I just want to say thank you to Michelle, who's on our team, who handles our logistics, and then Zach is he is our link provider in the chat. So please take advantage of those. And again, if you have not downloaded the toolkit or the community concerns, please go on the IREC website. Because it's a free resource for you. And we also want any input, comments. I believe I like to say it's a live document. So we want to continue to make sure it's updated and it has the most pertinent and updated information. So any last comments? I see no questions. Wonderful. Thank you, Ethan and Sean, so much for your time today, and everybody who participated. We really appreciate you giving us your time. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.